Hey guys, Keith here. All right, time for a release update video. It has been a little while, been a stack of releases, a lot of stuff changing in xSchedule, probably more so than xLights, largely because it's the time of year and lots of bug fixes as people have started to use things that they probably haven't touched much over the course of the year. So I'm going to run through, we're covering versions 42 through 53, so 11 releases. I'm only covering enhancements as usual. The bug list is a bit longer than the enhancement list at the moment, so hopefully this won't be too long. I plan to break it into two pieces. I'm going to start with all the xLights changes, then I'll come back around and talk about all of the xSchedule changes. That way the video can be nicely broken up for those that don't use xSchedule, as many don't. All right, so let's start with the oldest releases. Check sequence, check for submodels with nodes not in the parent model. What does that mean? Basically what that means is it's possible, for instance, for you to create a model. I'm just going to choose an arbitrary model, a star, and come down to submodels. And with submodels, obviously, you can type in the nodes. So you can have 1, 2, and there it is, 1 and 2, that's fine. But this has only got 50 nodes. It's also possible to type 53 in here and it won't complain and it won't show up over here. So now if I go up and run tools, check sequence, as well as that empty submodel, which already warns because I created 2 submodels. Yeah, so that's the first one where I had no nodes inside it. It also flags that submodel 2 has nodes that are outside the range of the parent model. So that's now showing up as a warning in check sequence. Let's go back. Okay, moving up. Add text effect, grabbing text from a file. So yeah, so this is, if we create a new sequence here, and we grab a, it's not going to make a lot of sense, but if we grab a text effect and drop it down, you can now actually select a file to pull the text from. It can actually be a multi-line file either, and it actually will display for most fonts. There are some fonts where it doesn't display very well. You just browse, you select the file, and when it renders, it will go out to that file and drag it in. It's really useful if you're using the same text in multiple sequences and you think you might need to update the text. So rather than having to go update every sequence file, find all the text effects, click on them, change it, you can now just drag it in from a text file. You change it once in the text file, you do a batch render, and all of your text effects would have that updated. So let's demo it in action. Let's quickly go back here, create ourselves a matrix. Looks good. Whoops, we didn't want to save that. What we want to do is create a new sequence because that's easier than adding the matrix into our current one. We're going to grab our text effect. We're going to drop it onto our matrix like so. We need to create a new text file. We'll put hello in it. We're going to save that onto our desktop. We're going to call it, I don't know, Fred. And so we come back in here, we browse for it, go to the desktop, there's fred.text, and there's the word hello on our sequence. As easy as that. So hopefully that makes certain scenarios easier to deal with. Moving on, HTTP upload method for transferring fseq and MP3 files. So there's been a bunch of changes to FPP Connect. It's that time of year. So let me go through some of them. So normally the way in which this used to work was it always did an FTP connection to the Pi and uploaded everything by the Pi, versus when you use the user interface on the Pi, it uses a HTTP file transfer mechanism. So xSchedule's now been changed to actually use the same mechanism as the Pi. A couple other enhancements while I'm here. FPP, after I think it's 2.4 4 point maybe 2 has the ability to allow you to update or upload zipped content. So we can compress the FSCQ file using zip, and then transfer the zip file to the FPP, and then the FP will unzip the file when it gets there. The reason why that's good is because the FSCQ files are typically very compressible, sometimes as high as 15 to 1 in compression, and so the amount of time that takes you to zip and unzip is more than offset by the reduction in time in actually transferring the file across to the Pi. So that's there by default. You can suppress it if you really want to. There's also now an option here to suppress the media upload. So if you've uploaded all your sequences and you've just gone back and done a batch render and you want to re-upload your FSCQ files, but you don't need to send your media up, you can just click this checkbox and it won't send the MP3 files up. xSchedule also does, xLights also, when it connects to the Pi, detects the version of the Pi, and it adapts what it does and how it does it according to the versions, because there's been a number of changes, particularly in the jump from 1 to 2 in the way in which data is stored on the Pi. So we do our best to detect the version of the Pi and choose the right things to send. Sometimes, for instance, if you've got a UI password on the Pi or a few other things like that, we can actually struggle to detect the version. And if that's the case, you can come here and say what type of Pi it is. And if we don't successfully detect the version, then we'll default to either 1.x or 2.x and use the various methods that are appropriate for that type of Pi. Generally speaking, we'd recommend you leave this at 2.x, and if you run into issues, drop it to 1.x and see if that helps. So that's that stuff. So yeah, that's those two. Fixed timing tracks are more obvious. So okay, so normally a timing track is variable, meaning you can come up here and you can move it. If you add a timing track in here and you choose, I don't know, 100, actually, no, let's choose a metronome. Wish there was less clicks to do a metronome. It used to be that you could come up here and you could actually drag these things and resize them, but when you saved it, it actually wouldn't save them because it's actually a fixed timing track. And so now when you add a fixed timing track, like a particular number of milliseconds or a metronome, it actually won't let you edit these, and it actually shows the timing tracks up in a different color. If you do want to edit them, you can still do so. You just need to come down here and make the timing track variable. And when you do that, it changes to white, and now you can manipulate it. Well, I think you can manipulate it. Yeah, you can manipulate it. And when it saves, obviously it saves whatever you've changed. You can't convert it back to fixed. Once you've made it variable, it is variable, but you can always go and create another one. So that's that one. Prevent model chains from breaking when models are deleted. So this used to be really frustrating. So here we've got, if I sort these by channel order, so we've got this model is followed by this model is followed by this model. It used to be if you deleted the model in the middle here, then this thing would basically refer to a model that didn't exist, and it would break. You get error messages. You'd have to go and fix it. Now, if you delete that model, it automatically adjusts anything that was chained to it to chain to whatever it was chained to. So the model chain didn't break when I deleted that middle model. So that should save a bunch of mucking around when you delete models. Controller connection properties. So I'm going to spend a bit of time on this. So this is, it's implemented. It's going to change a little bit over time in terms of the implementation with the various controllers. But basically what this is the controller connection property has now been broken out into its own section. And by default, it just shows the port and the protocol. And you can come in here and you can choose the port. it will auto-populate the protocol. But you also get a bunch of other attributes here. Now, these are attributes that are applicable to this port and applicable on the controller. These properties are not dealt with by xLights, so you need a controller that supports these particular properties. At the moment, there's only two, and the support's a little bit different on each. If you're using FPP as a controller, so you're using you know, a cape or something on FPP, then these properties all are applied at the model level on the controller. And the way that works is when we upload to the controller, it creates a new virtual string for each model, and it can set brightness and null pixels and gamma and color order, etc., on a per model level applied on the controller. If you're using the Falcon controller, it will also take advantage of these properties, but it will only look at these properties on the first model attached to a particular port. So if you've daisy chained together several models on a particular port, it's only going to look at these properties at the moment on the first model. It won't look at all the others and apply those. So you can have, for instance, null pixels in front of the first model. You can document it here and upload it to the controller. But if you've then got null pixels between model 1 and model 2, you can't do it yet on the Falcon controller. That's something that will probably come early next year. There's a few things I need to do to get that working properly. The way this works is you come in here, you say, I'm going to add null pixels, and you set the number of null pixels here. And when you upload it to the controller, that will get applied to the controller. It doesn't change the FSCQ file in any way. Now, if you're doing DMX or Renard or PixelNet, etc., the properties here change. Obviously, the port now refers to the DMX port, which is probably a much smaller number because typically controllers only have a couple of DMX ports. This DMX channel's interesting. Generally speaking, you don't really need to set it, but I would, and it represents what is the channel within the DMX universe that's going out this port. The reason it becomes slightly important is if you've got a, let's say, a 16-channel DMX controller and you don't use the first 3 ports, if you don't set this DMX channel, when we upload it to the controller, we won't necessarily get the start channel right. And it may cause some issues with how we configure the controller. So if the first port you use on that controller is port 3, I suggest you type 3 into this field here for the DMX channel of that prop, and that will ensure that we recognize that that DMX output actually should start at channel 1 in the universe. That's why it's there. Yeah, that's an emerging feature. Some of it's already there, but there's more work to be done. FPP Connect via HV option to create a pen to playlist whatever is uploaded. So you may have seen this when I had that FPP Connect up. And I think you have to have an FPP actually connected here, but you have this ability to append to a playlist. And yeah, so this is the list of playlists that currently exist on this FPP. This is one of my test FPPs, and so I can come in here when I'm doing the upload and say I want to add it to the test playlist. And so when I upload these whatever sequences I had in here, it would add them into this test playlist automatically and save me having to do it. I'm pretty sure it adds it to the end. Key binding support. So there's been a couple of changes to key bindings, just a few little tweaks. Key bindings is one of those things that you know, we have one known issue with it, which I've never quite got to the bottom of, and I'm sure I will at some point. Yeah, let's which folder are we in? xLights test. Sorry, I have so many show folders for various reasons. I'll use this one because it's up to date. All right. So there's a couple of extra key bindings in here. In these releases, it's probably these 3 that are new. So effect update. for a long time now, when you were in here, there is this update button. It used to have F5 after it. I've still set the key bindings up so F5 effectively presses this key. And that allows you to select multiple effects, change the properties in here. And if you press the F5 key, it will press this update button and all of the settings will be applied to any of the effects that are open. I've also added an optional key binding for this update button here on the color panel. And the way you would do is you would come in and you would basically put the key code into this particular field here to say what shortcut you want to use for it. As you can see in this key binding file, there's a lot of shortcuts that are possible in here, which we haven't assigned keys to. That's your choice. If you want to assign keys, feel free to start populating this file with the keys that you want to do. The other thing I've done is I've added cancel render. Cancel render was always the escape key. So if you're in the middle of rendering something particularly large, you could always, as long as you had focus in this area here, press the escape key and the render would cancel. Sometimes you have to hold it in a little time, particularly if it's quite busy rendering and all the threads are used up. It's not quite that responsive. By adding it as a key binding, two advantages you get. One is obviously you can change the key that you use, so maybe you don't want to use escape. But the other advantage is it doesn't matter so much whether you've got focus down here in the grid. Even if the focus is somewhere else, the escape key will still be caught and stop the rendering. So that's why that one's there. Okay, we've talked about that. Warn if check sequence if videos are being rendered without render cache. So render cache was introduced a little while ago and many people have turned it on and seen some pretty remarkable improvements in their render times, particularly if they have really large shows or really dense matrices, etc. It can make a huge difference. One of the side effects when I introduced the render cache was I took away the video cache, and the reason I took away the video cache was the render cache was pretty much the same thing, except much more broadly applicable across a number of different effects. It doesn't actually apply to all effects because not all effects actually benefit that much from a render cache. Some of these are really quite simple to render, and then there's some of them that would really benefit from render cache, except they can't actually work with the render cache, such as the warp, which is kind of unfortunate. But one of the ones that does benefit is the video effect. And in fact, rendering a high definition video onto a matrix and not having render cache on is going to cause you massive ongoing slowness. So if you do drop a video effect into your sequence and your settings up here with the render cache is not turned on, so it's disabled like it is here, then basically you will get a warning. So I don't even have to video, I think. So if I just drop a video effect in there and do tools, check sequence, I come down the end and here, apart from the fact that my video doesn't exist, right, warning, sequence has one or more video effects where the render caching is turned off. This will render slowly. Okay, so yeah. That's a warning, and obviously if you fix that up it will improve render speed dramatically, and that's why I consider it a warning. Okay, let's go back on. Where are we? Fix some old value curve warnings. Okay, so this dates back a long time. More than a year ago, we had to rework the way we did value curves in order to address some issues with the way they were being stored and our ability to then go and change the ranges of some of our sliders, etc. Along that way, we thought we fixed it. We thought it was upgradable. We hit some problems, etc., etc. Anyway, so there's been a bit of a legacy of issues, and when you run check sequence, you get hundreds of errors potentially, depending on where your seeks came from, saying, oh, you've got a value curve and it's out of date, and you need to go back and do this, etc. Well, in the last couple of months, I found a way to actually do the upgrade properly onto those value curves, and based on things that people have been sending me, I've progressively been going back and putting in place those fixes that fix those value curves. So in many cases, those things are now resolved and you won't see them. That you still may be seeing some of them, and if you are seeing some of them and you send them through to us, I'll place the updates in there to try and get rid of it. So basically, there's no reason for these to continue to exist. If you're still seeing them, it means that you haven't sent something to me and asked me to sort it out. It's not hard for me to do so. I just need to be told which ones need doing. Display the range of controller outputs in the model list. Okay, so this is let's take this thing here. Make this 2811. Okay, so this is set up as a 16 string matrix starting from on port 2, and so now up here, instead of just saying WS2811:2, it actually shows you 2 to 17, reflecting the fact that this is actually going to use 16 connections to the controller. Why? Well, it's going to use 16 connections because this is 16. If I set this to 8, 100, and 2, which is exactly the same sort of matrix, but it's now 8 connections with a zigzag, you can see now it shows connections 2 to 9. So a quick way to see how many controller outputs you're using for a particular prop is now to look up here, and you can see it. In fact, if you come down and start to add additional properties in here, like add a null pixel, you'll see that they also appear up here as well. So you can see them up in the model list. Add a tool to clean up file locations. So let's go back to our sequence here. In this video, let's go and browse for a video on my desktop. Stash, miscellaneous light stuff. Do I have videos? Thought I had videos. Here we are. There's a video. Crawling bubbles. I have no idea what that is. Not that it matters. Let's go and create a picture effect. Okay, let's browse for that. Same location. Do I have any pictures in here? I don't know. I'll do. No idea what that is. All right, so now we've got a picture effect and a video effect. Of course, the problem is I've pointed to files that are stored all over the place, which is a bit of a problem because that it means that they're not in the show folder. So if I was to give this sequence to someone else, it would point to stuff all over the place, and that's a problem. So I added a tool up here right now, which is called Clean Up File Locations. And if I click on that, you can see what it will do is it will actually move the images underneath my show folder, which was xLights test. So if I go back to my xLights test folder, there's now a videos folder in here, which contains the video I was using, and an image folder which contains the image that I was using, and anything else. So basically it moves all of the files that your sequence references underneath your show folder and updates the properties of all of your models, etc., to point to those new locations. So I can now save this sequence. And all of those things will be correct. And if I share this sequence, or if I move it to another computer, etc., all of those file names and properties, etc., will all line up and automatically fix themselves. It's not that useful for shared sequence. To be honest, shared sequences, it'll already do this in part of the packaging process. But if you're moving your show folder between computers and then all of your models change, or you've done an import of a sequence and you'd installed the other person's sequence into some other folder, and then you brought it across and now everything's broken because whatever, this will help you fix things up and keep them in a healthy state. So yeah, kind of useful. What else have we got here? We've talked about that. We've talked about that. FPP Connect, that just means that as you go in and out of the FPP Connect dialog, all the things that you've previously selected will be selected again, so you don't have to, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you don't have to keep reselecting everything. One thing that has become apparent to me, because I've heard a number of people say, oh, I wish there was a way to, is there's actually a right-click menu here to select all or clear selections. So I've had a couple of people say, oh, I've got to go and click hundreds of things here. You can always select all and then unselect the few you don't want to upload, or vice versa. So yeah, that's there as well. We've talked about render cancel. So that's it for the xLights changes. Mostly just small usability things, a lot of stuff to do with uploading to FPP and just making your final show setup easier and helping you resolve some problems. So let's change track. Let's talk a little bit about the changes in xSchedule over those releases. So let's bring xSchedule up here. Okay, so the first things that are really obvious is you can see down here, I've made this text here a lot more obvious. So it's currently pointing to a show folder, which is my actual show folder. And you can see that it's in amber. And the reason it's in amber is because the my xLights show folder over here is actually set to an entirely different folder. And so that shows up in amber. So if someone says to me, oh, look, it works in xLights, but it doesn't work in xSchedule, and when they look down here, this is really big and bold and in amber, that tells me, well, one of the reasons why it probably works in xLights and not here is because you're not pointing to the same show folder. And if you're not pointing to the same show folder, your networks file is probably not the same, and therefore the data is not being handled correctly. The other thing is if you put it into FPP remote mode, you will, oh, sorry, I've got a master out there playing a test sequence. But yeah, there's this, the remote mode down here, which comes up in bold in red, because you can see that even if I select a playlist here, I can't say play selected, etc., because I'm in remote mode. So I wanted to make it really obvious that when this was running in remote mode. Yeah, anyway, so let's take it back out of remote mode and let's stop everything. So yeah, so a couple of little changes like that. Add delay to the screen map playlist item. What does that mean? Sorry, edit advanced. So if you're doing a screen map, there's now a delay item down here. So so screen map basically lets you choose part of your screen on your PC and output it to a matrix or a tree on your show. So you could in theory use a webcam, have the webcam display its image here on the screen, and then take the image off the screen and place it onto a pixel tree or onto a matrix, etc. And delay allows you to obviously delay the display of that. So you might want to only display the image from your webcam 30 seconds into the song. And so you could use a delay to do that. That's what that one means. Add MIDI timecode offsets. So very few people use this, but there is a MIDI timecode. MIDI timecode allows you to have xSchedule work with other show elements. You can set in here a MIDI timecode offset. Typically, this is in milliseconds. So the most common timecode offset is 1 hour. And so to do that, you would have to put obviously 3,600 milliseconds, which is, sorry, 3,600 seconds, which is however many that is. What is it? 3.6 billion milliseconds is how you would do that. And that just causes the time code that is exchanged between xSchedule and the other things in your show to be offset by plus. So everything will show as 1 hour and 1 second or whatever when it's playing. That's just for compatibility. I don't entirely understand why MIDI does that, but they do. Manually adding IP addresses. I don't know about you, but I find this really useful down here to know the status of all my controllers. What I can do down here is if I right click, I can actually edit and add additional IPs. So you can see here that by default, these IP addresses like my router, etc., are not by default included on the list. So I can come in here and add them and put a description in, and it will then keep track of those elements in this list. And let me know if they're online or offline. So if you've got some other things in your show, I don't know, maybe your projector's got an IP address, although actually I think those already appear here if you're trying to control them via PJ Link. But yeah, if there's other elements that you need to know whether they're on and you can ping, then obviously this is a way to monitor them here and get that sort of full view of how your show's going. And obviously if you're using the web interface, you can see it there as well. Adjust FPP sync packets to match the 2.x send pattern. And this had a bug in it, which was fixed in 53 as well. So basically, FPP changed its sync pattern. It used to just send it out every 16 frames. But then in 2.x, they made some slight adjustments and realized that if they sent the sync packets more frequently in the first second or two of playing the show, then what would happen is the remaster and remote would get into sync a lot quicker and stay in sync a lot better. And so xSchedule has been updated to do the same thing, which ensures that they work well together and stay well in sync. So that's that one. There's not a lot to show there. It's behind the scenes. Adding the ability to dim a range of channels as a playlist item. So this is a new playlist item. Let's imagine I'm playing this sequence here, except that's an audio file. But let's imagine, I don't know, let's go to my show. Let's imagine in this sequence here, I say, you know what, my matrix in this particular sequence, I want to dim it down by 50%. So I can come in here and add a dim playlist item. I'm going to want to bump its priority up because it needs to be higher than the FSCQ file so that it gets applied after the FSCQ file. Its duration, I'm going to want it to be the same so that it applies through the entire song. Why 105, 150? Well, because that's 105, 150. And now I can come in and I can say, yeah, well, my matrix is on universe 50. Actually, let's say universe 1000, because I know that exists. Start channel 1, and it goes for, I don't know, 2400 channels. Okay, and then I come up to here and I say, make it 50%. All right, and so that's what that's going to do is it's going to dim my matrix during Amazing Grace to 50% only. So that's that one. The ability to find a step in a playlist. Okay, so this, one of the things you've always been able to do is you've been able to come in here and say, I don't know, let's do a, where is it, RDS. So RDS, you could send out to a EDM transmitter. You could send out, you know, in here it's a % step name, and it would output the name of the step that was playing at that point in time to be the, what's it called, radio text, I think it's called, on the EDM. The problem is in every single step, you would have to add this RDS thing in to do that, which kind of defeated the point of having this as a variable in the first place. So what I've done is I've allowed you to add a step, and we're going to call this every step. It doesn't have to be called that. But you check this checkbox here to say run everything in this step in every step. Just a lot of everys in there. And if I come down to my RDS, I'm going to drag it up here to every step. And what this will do is now when every step plays, so when THX plays, when Light of Christmas plays, when You're Welcome plays, when Talking Trees 1 plays, this step up here is always going to also play inside that step. And I think from memory, it applies it after this has been applied. So if I wanted to dim my matrix in every single sequence, I could come up here and place it up here. And by default, I can't remember if it applies to priorities as well. It probably does. But yeah, you can put them up here, and now that's going to apply in every step without you having to add it into every step. So that's kind of cool. But notice when I click OK here, notice that every step doesn't show up in here. And the reason it doesn't show up in here is because it's not actually a playable step of the sequence. It's just a step that applies in every step. In theory, you can have multiple of them, but I wouldn't, but you can. Optional parallel output of data in xSchedule. There's a couple of little options that have been added in here. There's this multi-threaded transmission. If you do that, what xSchedule will try to do is when it goes to send the data out to the controllers, what it usually does is it goes through and it sends it to controller 1, universe 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through, and then it starts on the next one and the next one and the next one, and so on. With multi-threaded transmission, what it will do is it will actually break that work up across multiple processes in your computer and send out the data faster across using all the CPUs in your system. So in theory, the data will get out of your computer a lot quicker. The reason I've got it as an option is because there is a risk that that data will now arrive at your controller in a random order. Most controllers probably won't care, but there's a risk that some of your controllers will care, and so I didn't want to break your show. So it's an option. It's off by default. You can turn it on. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, turn it off. You'll be fine. There's also this continually try to open outputs. If you turn this on, and I don't know, let's say you fire up xSchedule and you've forgotten to plug your law dongle in. Normally what would happen is you would get an error message saying I couldn't open COM4, and you'd have to click OK, and then COM4 wouldn't be open. You'd have to shut xSchedule down and so on. If you select this option, what will happen is xSchedule will start up. It will try to open COM4. It'll realize that COM4 is not there. So it will show up your COM4 down here in the list of controllers as being as red. But if you then take your controller and you plug it in and COM4 becomes active, the next time it tries to send a packet to COM4, it will actually open that up and start to send the data. And so you don't get the errors. B, if there are some transient errors that exist at startup, they will be recovered from and it will then continue to work. It will not necessarily gracefully handle the situation where you pull the dongle out and then you put it back in. I make no guarantees about what will happen in those circumstances. I don't have any serial controllers to test with, so that was 50. So that's what that one is. Oh, that's one of those. The force law outputs to occasionally output a channel even if it hasn't changed. I ran into a circumstance here where if you have a law controller connected but not powered on, and you power it on after xSchedule has started sending data to it, and if xSchedule is sending the same data value over and over again, xSchedule actually will not ever send the data after the controller gets turned on, because as far as it's concerned, it's already sent that data and it doesn't resend law channel data just because of the overhead of the protocol. What this change does is basically it forces xSchedule to periodically resend data out to a law controller for each channel. Basically, it counts the number of times it tried to send and it didn't send because it didn't need to send. And once it reaches 200, it says, all right, that's enough. I'm going to send it this time regardless, just to make sure the law controller's received it. So you might see a lag of 10 seconds or so, but the data should start to be output. A state event to xSchedule. So yeah, so this is interesting. So yeah, obviously we've had events this year, and some people have built some interesting things associated with it. But there's now a new event here called a state. And a state event is things like when xSchedule turns the lights on, i.e. the bulb up here goes green, or when it goes off, it turns red, or when there's an output open error, the ones I was just talking about, or even when xSchedule starts up. You can fire an event and you can go and do things up here. So you can adjust the volume, or you can do whatever, play a playlist, do whatever. Now, I'm interested in hearing from people about if there are other events that they would like to see in here that might make sense. These were the 4 that I came up with at the time I developed the feature, but I'm sure there might be others that you might be interested in dealing with. So if when xSchedule starts up, you want to send a message, you can do that. Now, the one I haven't done here is power down or shut down. And the reason for that is because by the time we're in a mode where we're trying to shut down, basically it's too late for me to be doing anything interesting. The program is already in a state where it's trying to shut everything down, and kicking off a new process or doing something doesn't make a lot of sense. So please don't ask me for a shutdown in here, because that's not going to happen. And on crash is another time when I'm not about to go kicking off processes either. So how that works is, I turn the lights on and the volume drops. I turn the lights off, turn it back on again, it drops again. So you can see how that event triggers based on what's going on. All right. Add an option to, we've talked about that. Add in, oh yeah, so there's a couple of new APIs, which of course you can also do via buttons. So we'll just show them via the buttons here. New APIs. So there's a new API for closing xSchedule. So if you'd like to remotely trigger something which shuts xSchedule down, maybe you've got a daemon process that monitors when xSchedule shuts down and restarts it, for instance, etc. You might want to schedule a shutdown of xSchedule. So you could do that using this API trigger and cause xSchedule to recycle itself. I know that there are, for instance, there's a couple of minor memory leaks in xSchedule that accumulate over time, and if you wanted to reboot it at 2 o'clock in the morning, you could do that if you had a daemon process sitting there in the background restarting it potentially. And add in seconds to the current step position. So that allows you to build little fast forward buttons. So I've got a add 15 seconds and subtract 15 seconds. So if I'm playing this playlist, you can see I'm currently at second. Turn the volume off. You can see I'm currently at 6 seconds. I press add and it jumps to 23 seconds. And so I can jump forward songs, but I can also jump back. If I jump back, it gets to 0 and it won't jump to the prior song. It doesn't jump to the new song going this way, except of course that it's actually playing, and so as soon as I reach the end of the song, it automatically ticks over to the next. It's not the add button that's causing it to tick over. The add button gets it to the last second of the song, and then it just ticks over automatically. So they are actually consistent, even though they don't look it. So it's the 2 API adds, and that's it. So a bunch of little things, little usability features. There has been a whole bunch of bug fixes. Look, both FPP and xSchedule have had a huge number of fixes over the last few months. It's extremely hard to fully test every possible scenario that people use. I found xSchedule's been reasonably stable for me, but then again, I run a relatively simple show. I show a bit of video, I play a bunch of FSCQs, I run everything at 50 frames a second. It's been very, very straightforward, but some people have had problems with sequences skipping and hanging and stuff like that. .53 I think is pretty good. That's not to say all of those problems are solved, but I'm waiting at this point in time to hear from anyone who's having issues, and we'll continue to look through it. Just make sure you describe the problems you're having and send me through a log file that's produced about the same time that the problem occurred, so that I can look into it. And please, if you're available to help me work through the problem, maybe jump onto Zoom, show me some stuff. I can also send tests, versions, etc. for you to try out, and really keen to get those things working well. So thanks guys, and Merry Christmas.